Good morning, everybody. The word crisis may seem like a little bit of an overstatement, but it's not. And I think after the next few minutes, you're going to agree with me. We have a massive problem with identity, not just digital identity, but really every form of identity. In 1993, this cartoon was published in The New Yorker. It went on to be the most popular cartoon in the history of The New Yorker magazine. It simply shows a dog sitting at the internet. The internet was pretty new in 1993. And he's excited, he's wagging his tail, and he's telling another dog, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. It's turned into a meme. But what's interesting, the problem has still not been solved. The problem is this. It's called siloed identity. And it happens every time you go create an identity to interact with an organization, such as your bank. But also, your government is going to ask you to do something different and get another one. And then every single application you interact with, every company, every organization, you get another one, and another one, and another one. How many of you use a password manager from something like LastPass or 1Password? Raise your hand. If you do not, you should. I know several people that have hundreds of passwords managed in these password managers. The record I've heard from a personal friend is 830. The average American, I don't know if it's worldwide, the average American has about 45. That's a lot. And so raise your hand if you have never reused a password. They're all unique. Really? Wonderful. And if you're getting, never? I said never. All right. The siloed identity problem results in just about every imaginable breach of security and everything. It's really at the core of all the problems, and people don't realize how much it adds up. About 5% of the global economy is lost, not just to direct fraud, but the staggering cost of preventing it and then fixing the problem once it has occurred. It leaves behind an absolute wake of destruction for people, organizations, and things. Let's talk very briefly about what it does to people. For people in industrialized nations, you got a whole lot of identities to manage, which is a royal pain. We all know that. Your private information is scattered everywhere, and that's why we have so many breaches, because our information is in all these different places. We have identity theft because we use weak passwords. And we can be impersonated too easily when we have those weak passwords. And how many of you, when you get to that page on the website that says sign up and it's a form and fill out all your information, you get to that page, you hesitate. I mean, we all hesitate. There was a time early in the internet when we would sign up for just about everything. We would install just about every app, but now we've slowed down. We do not want to install another app. We don't want to get another identity, another credential. It's absolutely killing interaction and engagement. And of course, our data is being harvested and sold, especially in the US. Thankfully, we have things like GDPR coming to Europe, which will start to take a bite out of that. But that's in Western countries, in industrialized nations. In other places, this is a picture of what you would call internet noobs. These are people that are brand new to the internet. They've never had an identity, they're never used to the internet, and when they get in, they end up getting, same thing we do, a Facebook ID, a Google ID, and then they get sucked into this vortex of surveillance capitalism. They start getting ads for things that they've clicked around, and it just, they don't like it. It's not expected to them. It's abnormal, and it feels awkward to their cultures, and it's a problem. Then you have refugees who've lost identifying information. You have doctors that can't prove they're doctors and teachers that can't prove they're teachers or that they've gotten any training or graduated from anything. They lose everything. It becomes a huge problem. These are actual refugees from Myanmar. Human trafficking. One of the first things that traffickers do when they kidnap someone is try to destroy every semblance of identity that they have. They try to destroy every document that they have. They don't call them by their name. They tried to destroy and take away their identity. There was a tragic story of a young girl who actually escaped her captors, only to find herself in court with their captors fighting to get her back against her mother, and no one could prove anything. Luckily, the mother did win. I heard from Mia Harbitz at the World Bank about an amazing story in Uruguay where they had a problem with babies getting stolen, infant abductions. I mean, you think about it. How do you know that any baby that you see belongs to the person who's carrying it? There's really not a good way to know. I mean, the only way I'd be able to tell that it wasn't their baby is if they were running and someone was chasing them and there was some kind of problem. But you assume someone's got a baby, it's their baby, right? So it was a growing problem. They instituted footprints. They would take a high-resolution image of the baby's footprint. And what was interesting is in order to tell one footprint from another, it needs to be 1,200 DPI. They didn't have 1,200 DPI. They had 600 DPI. So all they got with the baby footprint was a blob, and no one could tell the difference between one baby and another. But it didn't matter. The bad guys found out that they were able to track all of these infants. Infant abductions in Uruguay went to 0. And then they fixed the DPI in the scanners and made it so it was real. And then, of course, we have the unbanked. 2 billion people who do not have a bank account. They are completely left out of the financial system. And then the big one. The United Nations came out with Sustainable Development Goal 16.9. It's a goal to get legal identity for everybody by 2030. I don't know if you realize this, but there's 1.1 billion people who have no identity whatsoever. 1.1 billion. They're called the invisibles. It's time we solve the problem. It's time we figure out. I was going to end, but you know what? I forgot there's another section here. Companies. Companies feel pain too. This is just fines paid to US regulators by financial institutions over the last couple of years. Billions of dollars worth of fines. We all know what this means. Phishing. Phishing is a massive problem. This is where the customer is not the one being impersonated. The institution is the one being impersonated to the customer. And there's a kind of phishing a lot of people don't know about. If you're in the identity business, you know about it. It's called spear phishing. This is where instead of sending a whole bunch of fake emails to a bunch of people, hoping you get a response from some customer who you can fool, instead, you do homework on one person for months and months. And you find out what transactions they're involved in, and you send the perfect email at the perfect time to intercept a password or a credential or something to fool one person. This is how most attacks are successful now. And last but not least, the real terror of identity, the Internet of Things. Imagine this broken identity system being put onto billions of devices. There are so many compromised webcams around the world. There's a search engine to find your fetish. People hack into cars, drive them off the road. And here's a great idea. Why don't we make it so that your pacemaker can be hackable? What could go wrong? This is what we're doing. We're making everything in the Internet of Things connectable and wireless and hackable with the same broken identity system that we have today for people. This is where I thought it was going to end, and I am. We have to get back to the original problem. How do you know that you're dealing with a dog, a person, your bank? How can you tell the difference? We need to solve the identity problem, and thankfully, I think the technology is finally here to do it. Thank you.
As you can see, there are many topics that we need to discuss, so we're going to extend Timothy's keynote now into a panel discussion. I would like to welcome our next panelists to the stage. Sam Cassatt, Chief Strategy Officer of Consensus. We have Brime, who is the co-founder of Cash Shield. Of course, Timothy Ruff from Evernym, and the session will be moderated by Robert Hackett from Fortune magazine. Please welcome them to the stage.
All right, thanks for joining, everybody. Hello and welcome. Let's kick things off with a question. I want to ask, who here in the audience has ever had some aspect of their identity stolen? Maybe that could be a social security number, credit card information, maybe even just a password being compromised. All right. Not as many as I thought. I think some of you are sitting a little too comfortable. You should be careful about that. But let's dig into it. And Sam, I want to open with you. And let's just set up the stakes here. Back when the internet was first made, there was no protocol for identity that was made as the basis of everything. No way to prove that I am who I say I am. I mean, perhaps it's obvious, but why is digital identity important? Why do we need to have representations of ourselves online?
Sure. So that's a very broad question. I think in the actual very beginning, we had ARPANET. There wasn't really a need for identity because it was built in. People were logging onto university servers. You could actually tell who someone was from their username because at their university, you could call up the IT department there and figure out who it was. We never really upgraded that, and we ended up with the current identity systems on the internet. Those usually amount to a username and a password. Now we have a little more advanced things like two-factor authentication. And what we've ended up with is actually a couple companies, namely Facebook and Google, that own a lot of the identity information. So who, for instance, has ever logged into something with Facebook? Right. So it's really easy to do. That's one less password you have to remember. But the upshot of that is, the result is, Facebook now owns the data that is attached to that, right? They're looking for as much information as they can have being attached to that because they can monetize it, et cetera. So in blockchain technology and in the internet infrastructure in general, the way that you log into something is extremely important. And so at Consensus, we mostly work on blockchain technology. That is an opportunity. The advent of blockchain technology is an opportunity to reinvent that architecture and have not Facebook owning your login, not Facebook owning the authentication that you have into the applications you use, but instead you can own that identity. And in blockchain, it's crucial that almost every action that you take be authenticated. Every action is sort of a login. That's why blockchain is so secure, because each and everything needs to be a highly secure transaction. That data attached to that, the way that you navigate around the internet, is sort of the crux of any system. It's the crux of blockchain technology, and that's what we work on.
So I want to get into blockchain tech in just a little bit, but first, Irene, so your company is constantly making decisions, trying to decide what is a real transaction, what is a fake one, who is actually making a payment, and who's a thief or a fraud.
Yeah.
So give us a scope of this problem, of this fraud problem online.
Well, I think Timothy just explained it very well. So basically, there's more and more data in the internet, and that data can get stolen at any time during a data breach. And all that data is put into the illegal markets. So fraudsters access that data, and they need to monetize it. So how do they do it? They basically find themselves with maybe 10,000, 15,000 account logins. And what they do is they just basically monetize those accounts. They need to get back the money that they invested when buying that data, and that's when the problem starts. So how the industry has responded to that basically is by making it more difficult to the user to access those accounts. So it's what you mentioned, the two-factor authentication. So most of you, if you are Germans here, how many of you get an SMS sent to your mobile phone whenever you log into the internet banking? Because I get it every time. And if you are banking, if you are Germans and you're banking here with Deutsche Bank, you probably have this mobile 10 thing, mobile number, which you need to download. You need to download the app, then you need to associate a QR code to your account. I mean, it's all about a question of making it more difficult to access your account. But the problem is that this two-factor authentication, which works and basically solves one part of the problem, it doesn't really solve the root of the problem. And it's basically making it, it's basically putting a gate, and whoever has that key to that gate is able to enter your account and monetize it. So what we do is we are not so interested on who is behind, but more about the behavior. So it's not about just putting a gate into the account, but more about having a camera which is constantly making monitoring or a surveillance of what's going on in the account, and being able to identify and to alert in real time about the fraudulent movements into that account.
All right, so it's blockchain time. Timothy, what is a blockchain? Why do we need one?
Yeah. What is a blockchain? Raise your hand if you've heard of blockchain. All right.
All right.
Dumb question. So we're not going to talk what is blockchain.
We've got
go
experts
there for
here.
a while. I think the great breakthrough, the great opportunity with blockchain is to solve the digital identity problem once and for all, for the whole planet. For every use case, for industrialized nations, for people like us who have everything and frankly are rich compared to most of the world who are not, all the way to the Sustainable Development Goal to get everybody else an identity, the invisibles that don't have one. It's now possible, and there's a concept that is a sea change, a fundamentally different approach that's so exciting. It's called self-sovereign identity. And how many of you have heard of the term self-sovereign identity? Okay, so some of you have. Here's what it is. It's actually pretty simple. Every identity that you have today was given to you by someone else. Everywhere you log in, every credential you have was given by someone else. And most of the time, that entity that gave it to you requires that you use it with them. And you can only use it with them. Your bank only lets you use it with your bank. And Sweden has Bank ID, and you can use it in multiple places. But for the most part, you have a credential, you can use it in one place, and that's it. And they dictate to you. And if they don't like you, they decide that you're a bad guy, they take it away. There's nothing you can do. There's terms of service and privacy policy. What self-sovereign identity is an identity that's yours that no one can take away. And you can prove it, you can recover it with your biometrics. You could be a refugee that swims up on the shore of a host country with nothing and recover your identity and your wealth and your relationships and everything, your reputation and everything else. That just simply was not possible before. And now it is, and it's very exciting.
So Sam, you brought up Facebook Connect earlier. And that's a pretty simple, easy, hassle-free way to log into different services online. Why do we need an alternative to that?
So that's a good question. And to Timothy's point, part of the reason is, one, the adage, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? So a lot of people see different business models, different ways that they would like to have control over their data, and we see that with some of the regulation coming in Europe, for instance. People are becoming more aware of that. The second reason is there are new types of business that are possible. There is a richness of data that is possible that empowers the user that only occurs when users have control over their own data. So for instance, if I'm a citizen, I live in New York, I get those externalized attributes of my identity. So New York State might issue me a driver's license, the United States might issue me a passport, Uber might give me a 5-star rating or a 4.7 star rating. I have different companies that own different aspects of my identity. The problem is, if I want to go take that identity and do something with it, Uber probably won't let me take that over to Lyft. The identity that I use in the United States to, say, open a bank account might not work in another country. If I'm poor or I exist in a country where the government is not well-funded enough or well-structured enough to give me an identity that functions well, then I don't really have any recourse. I don't really have any way that I can do something like open a bank account. All of those attributes of my identity are either kind of weak or don't exist. So if we create a platform, a technology platform like those enabled by blockchain, where my identity is created by me, it's pretty much free, and it has the same power as something like a government-issued identity because it's able to collect attributes like that a trusted actor attests to the fact that I am me, or that I've had excellent behavior in every financial transaction I've ever undertaken. Those attributes add together to form a rich identity that you control and you own. I can take it to any country. I could be a refugee that doesn't have some documentation from some government that maybe wasn't able to give it to me. I can take those rich attributes, I can add them together. Those comprise my identity. And suddenly I have, for nearly free, the ability to do the equivalent of open a bank account, to participate in economic activity globally, to demonstrate to other parties that I have a good reputation so that I can easily, frictionlessly do business with them. And those are things we normally relegate to things like credit rating agencies or governments or other things that cost a lot of money and are only available to the few. So that's why I think moving to a model of identity that is more self-sovereign, as Timothy puts it, that is more decentralized, that is comprised of attributes that you create and you control, is an interesting step in a technology direction and a governance direction for our society.
And your company is actually working on a project, Uport, on the Ethereum blockchain that aims to solve some of these problems. Can you give us just a few sound bites about that project?
Sure. So Uport is a self-sovereign identity. It allows you to act on the Ethereum blockchain for now. So Ethereum, we believe, is the most interesting, powerful blockchain platform. When you act on a blockchain, when you participate in an application, just like on Facebook or in another app, you need to log in, you need to authenticate yourself and prove who you are and tell that application that you're acting on behalf of your identity. What Uport is it's a generalized way to act on blockchain systems. And not only is it a generalized way, you can sort of think of it like a browser for blockchain. It allows you to say, I have a smart contract that says I'll sell my house for a certain amount of money tomorrow if this condition is met. I need a way to view that transaction. I need a way to very highly securely authenticate and sign that transaction and say, yes, I do agree to that contract that will be executed by this blockchain system. That's what Uport does, and it does it with the notions of decentralized self-sovereign identity, much like what Timothy is describing, and added to by the attributes that come out of services like Irene's, where we need to authenticate, we need to say, the state of New York does say that this person is Sam Cassatt. Uber does say I have a good rating, or a credit rating agency does say that I'm able to purchase my next home, or whatever it may be that's relevant to the transaction. So that Uport platform is the sort of like a browser for blockchain that allows you to act with your identity.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. Do you know how much your Uber account is worth in the illegal market?
I'd be curious to know.
$25. If you have 4.5, 4.7 rating, maybe it's going to be more expensive. I don't know, but
I hope so.
I mean, for $25, you can get Uber accounts. So you just need you can get them on the dark web and then just use them. And credit cards details, I think they come at $2, which is very cheap. Yeah.
What's the difference between like a 5.0 rating versus a 4.7 rating?
I have no idea, but he insisted so much on having a very good rating. So no, I guess the higher the rating, obviously, the more that you can do as a fraudster. So.
Mm-hmm. And so, Timothy, your company has also built its own blockchain to solve this identity problem. How many blockchains do we need here? What makes it different from Uport?
I think the answer to the universe is 42. We first heard about blockchain 2.5 years ago. As a matter of fact, show of hands. Who heard of blockchain a year or longer ago? Who heard of blockchain 2 years or longer ago? 3 years? 4? 5? 6? 7? 42? It's not honest. It's not 42 years old. So 2.5 years ago was when we discovered it. We're an identity company, and we were worried that someday our business plan would require us to host identity information for a whole lot of people. And so we knew that was a problem we'd have to solve someday. And we heard about blockchain, and we got excited because we thought, hey, we don't have to store people's stuff. There's a new way to do this. And that's great. And it solved a major problem. We got excited about it. We explored the space. I went on LinkedIn, and I was like, okay, who knows about blockchain? Who can teach us how to do all this? And I found the biggest, baddest crypto blockchain expert I could find in the whole world, Dr. Dmitry Kovratovich. I've said his name correctly. It took a while. At the University of Luxembourg, and reached out to Dmitry and engaged him. And he was very friendly and responded. He's famous for breaking AES and world-class cryptographer. And we've become great colleagues ever since. And we explored the space, and what we realized, what we concluded, and it's different. We have a friendly disagreement with Uport. We have dinner with the Uport folks, and we're first name basis with them. And we're not worried about the competition, frankly, because we're like a couple of mosquitoes in a nudist colony. I mean, there's plenty. Identity is such a big problem. It's $4 trillion. I think there's room for two competitors in a $4 trillion space. So not worried about that at all. We're very friendly.
We'll see.
But
Brawl, come on.
we'll split it. But what we concluded, long story short, we concluded that with Dimitri and a couple of other smart people, we formed a brain trust. We concluded that the Bitcoin blockchain and the Ethereum blockchain were not appropriate for identity. And that's the thing that they would disagree with, and that's fine. We have friendly disagreement on that. We concluded that we needed to design a new blockchain, a new ledger. It's actually not a blockchain. It's a distributed ledger, technically, that doesn't have blocks and chains the similar way, but it's a distributed ledger with decentralized governance. But what we did was we designed a brand new ledger from scratch that was fit for purpose just to do one thing, and that is privacy-enhancing self-sovereign identity. And it took us a year and a half, cost millions of dollars. We built the thing, we turned it on last July, and it's still getting stronger and stronger right now, and it's attracting the largest brands in the world. I can't name very many of them, but we're going to be announcing throughout 2018 huge partnerships. It's amazing. They're coming to us. But it's a fit-for-purpose distributed ledger that's just for self-sovereign identity. And the difficult thing we had to do is give it away. Spend all this money and all this time. But the whole point was self-sovereignty. We can't own it. No one can own it. That's kind of the whole point. And by the way, it's hard to give something away in a way that no one can own it again. That's not easy to do. So decentralized governance, we had to innovate with governance and everything else. And so the ledger is called Sovereign, S-O-V-R-I-N. And we built that ledger just to do that. And we gave that away. Everyone asked us, well, how are you going to make money if you give that away? And it's like, well, we're not making money on that. I had to give that away. But now there's new types of businesses that are possible using the underlying free thing that we gave away. So that was our strategy. It was different. And it's a unique approach because it's so expensive and took so long. No one else has done it yet. But we're on the far side of the complexity, and it's very exciting right now.
How many blockchain believers are there in the audience? Obviously, there are a lot of people who have heard of it. But how many people think that this is going to be the answer to some of these identity issues we have online? How many skeptics do we have in the audience? OK. All right.
Can I ask a follow-on to that question you just asked?
Please do.
Of the skeptics, how many of you are skeptical of permissionless blockchains, but less skeptical of other forms? How many of you know the difference between permissioned and permissionless ledgers? Raise your hand if you know the difference. Okay. There's an area of education. It's an important thing for people to understand the difference between permissionless, which is like Bitcoin and Ethereum, where you have proof of work and mining and those kind of very interesting things that Satoshi Nakamoto invented. And permission is different. And so anyway, I'm just curious to follow on. Thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to add one thing to that, and that is, at Consensus, a lot of companies, other than Consensus as well, it's important to realize that a permission system is something where the actors are known. You have to have permission to use it. We can use the same technology that is in the open source version of Ethereum that everyone uses, and we can deploy that in private context, right? So maybe 20 banks would like to do business with each other. They don't really want to let a random guy onto the network, but those 20 banks would love to utilize blockchain technology to settle trades between them or something. That's perfectly possible with the Ethereum blockchain, and in fact, we do that every day. So it's important to make that distinction.
Irene, how skeptical are you of this whole phenomenon that's going on?
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion yesterday, the three of us. So I'm very excited about this. I mean, I definitely see the need for this. I make business out of the current model and how everything is, how easy things are to break and how all that data can be monetized. So I'm definitely very excited. The only thing is I'd like I'm looking forward to the areas of application and see where that technology can be make a difference. And my only issue would be how safe is that going to be. I don't know if you guys want to add something, and then maybe we can start some sort of education for those in the audience who might not be that familiar. So that's my only thing.
So, Timothy, convince the skeptics out here.
Convince the skeptics. That's not easily done. You know, a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. And so someone has to, they have to want to dive in. I would recommend, there's a white paper that really changed my perception on this whole thing. And this is an old white paper. This is from early 2015 from one of the smartest people in the blockchain industry, Mr. Tim Swanson. And he wrote a seminal paper about the difference between permissioned and permissionless ledgers. And he's got a blog that's fantastic. He's just a deep, deep thinker called ofnumbers.com. And he doesn't work for us or anything. He was the one that we just wrote some of the most compelling stuff about it. With blockchain, you finally have an opportunity to have a database that people that don't like each other or trust each other can agree is correct. That's never been possible before. And it's a database that neither one of them controls, but they can both trust. There's something magical there about that. And then when you add the characteristic of immutability, you can't change a single comma in the history of a blockchain without breaking the chain. You can't change anything without everyone being able to see that someone's trying to monkey around with it.
Now, doesn't that have privacy implications? Like, say I don't want to have my information sort of recorded on an immutable ledger that can never be kind of tampered with.
This is, yes, 1,000% yes. It is our belief in our design that no private information in any form, encrypted or not, should ever be put on a public ledger. Now, a lot of competitive approaches do not believe that. They believe that if you encrypt it, you can stick it out there, and if you have an encrypted driver's license that's encrypted with a technology that can't be broken for decades, but you go use the hash, the same hash, and go to 5 bars in one weekend, well, they figure out who you are that fast. They just correlate you. And they don't have to break the hash. They just figure out, oh, same guy used that number 5 times, and now we know who it is. And once you've correlated, you're correlated forever. Your name is forever associated with that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So we've designed a system where there's no private information that goes on the ledger. The only thing that goes on the ledger is public identifiers and public keys. Who's familiar with PKI? When I say public keys, who knows what I'm talking about? Okay. And you wrote an article the other day about key management. Don't want to go into key management. Is that the Achilles heel of all blockchain is key management? Tough problem to solve.
It's key.
It's wow. Yeah. Anyway.
So,
Sam, yeah.
Could I add to the convincing the skeptics? Maybe this won't create complete firm believers out of everyone, but one comparison I'd like to make is centralized versus decentralized storage and management of identity, right? I'm sure we all heard about the Equifax breach. Lots of people had a lot of their identifying information, their name, social security numbers, et cetera. All that took is one breach to sell that information to hackers all around the world, right? And it was just one computer, one account, one database that needed to be compromised. If we have a blockchain-based identity system where the attributes of your identity are stored by decentralized actors, whether it's by you, or trusted parties, et cetera, that means you need to hack thousands of computers or millions of computers in order to achieve the same end. So at the very least, that's an incremental improvement, but I think the architectural promises are much more interesting than just that.
So I'd like to open the floor up in just a moment to some questions, but I'm going to ask just a couple more. And this one's for you, Irene. Often there's this seeming trade-off between security and convenience online. You mentioned two-factor authentication earlier, which can be a hassle. As somebody who has recently switched phones, having to set up your two-factor again is really annoying. How do you approach solving this fraud problem while also still making it very easy on the users?
Well, basically, it's all about being able to detect in real time and maybe not so much focusing on who is behind, but on the behavior behind the account how the account is behaving, or in the case of payments, about the transaction. So there's always going to be a balance. Usually what is good for companies or for governments, what's safe for that, is a complete hassle for consumers and vice versa. So the key is to try to have as many information as possible, try to detect in real time all, I mean, what we do basically is we use passive biometrics, and then we combine it with real-time pattern recognition, and then we are able to basically detect in real time if there's any fraudsters. So it's not so much about whether it's Irene the one login, but whether that behavior in that particular moment in that account is fraudulent or is genuine. Which brings me, and I don't know if you want to open the floor now, but you were talking about obviously for fraudsters. So fraudsters, for them, they need to make as many hits as possible in the shortest time possible, because I mean they're like you and me. I mean they need to make the most of their days. So for decentralized computers, obviously it's harder for them, because it's more of a hassle to try to hack I don't know how many computers, and then out of each computer they will only be able to get one small piece of information, and until the time they put up all the whole information, then obviously it's going to take them too long. But as blockchain becomes more and more the norm, then somehow that needs to be, or I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just me throwing this to the air. So maybe if it becomes the norm, then it's obviously going to get easier for them, because more people will be using it, and maybe it's easier to reach those computers. So
I guess I would argue that fundamentally, ubiquity of blockchain technology and ubiquity of decentralized storage of identity attributes probably makes us stronger against hackers, because maybe they will refine their techniques. Maybe they'll get better at hacking individual computers that are demonstrated to have blockchain identity information on them. I'm sure they'll get better at it. But fundamentally, storing those pieces of data in different locations makes it just a much more time-consuming, much more difficult task. So I would argue that, yes, there might be some marginal decrease in security at the edge, but fundamentally that architecture is much more secure.
Can I take a shot at the user experience question? So USAA is a $130 billion bank in the US, an insurance company. And a year ago, they implemented, it wasn't blockchain-based, but it was a biometric login. They got rid of username and password, and they made it so you could use your fingerprint or your voice, and I think your iris or something. There was a third biometric. But it just made it really, the user experience just shot up. And what was really interesting is there was this, I think it was Telefonica that did a survey of user experience of identity systems with financial institutions. All the largest financial institutions in the world are in the thing. And way up in the upper right corner is USAA. Their user experience shot up and their fraud went to almost zero. So these trade-offs aren't necessarily trade-offs anymore. It's possible to do it. And the system that we've designed, let me paint a picture for the way things could work in the future. It's very exciting. It's called claims exchange. And all claims exchange is the attributes that Sam was talking about, we call claims. I claim I'm a doctor, I claim my name is Timothy, I claim I'm a car, I claim I'm a device, I claim I'm an employee, I claim anything. I claim I'm a database in a certain state. It could be anything.
Or a dog on the internet.
Or a dog on the internet. And the point is, claims exchange just works like this. I give you some claims, and you can instantly verify them by checking signatures on the ledger, and you give me some claims, and we do this at the same time. And I check the claims you gave me, and you check the claims I gave you. And then we trust each other because we can exchange all kinds of things. We can exchange location, biometrics, anything. And when you do this, imagine opening an app and not logging in. Imagine these claims being shared passively behind the scenes, and you open the app and it just starts working. Because your location and maybe your voice, maybe the way you're typing, these were all measured ahead of time. And the company doesn't have to have your biometrics to do it. There's algorithms that allow you to compare biometrics without actually divulging the biometric to the company. There's really powerful stuff here, but the point is, you can really up the security by moving away from username and password and moving toward location and biometrics and all these other kinds of claims, and at the same time, have a much better user experience. You go to a door, and it just unlocks and opens. You open an application, and you don't have to log in. It just starts working. You call somebody, and while the phone is ringing, claims are being exchanged, and they recognize you, and they don't have to ask you any questions. I mean, so you don't have to have a trade-off in this new world. It's possible to have an improvement of security, privacy, and user experience all at the same time.
And not only an improvement, but I think one of the most important points about this for me is, yes, it's better than the existing system, but it's also really cheap compared to a government and a court system and lawyers. And when you have those billions of people that can't pay $10,000, $100,000 for a lawyer to run the financing documents for their company, when those people have an app that does the same thing, that's really the interesting part. And we're going to leapfrog the existing developed economies.
And this is what makes it workable for those countries who can't spend a lot of money for technology.
So I'd like to open up the floor. If anybody has questions, maybe we can fit in a couple. We've got one in the back over here. You? Yeah. Sure.
So I'm curious, how many of you spent time in a country below 50 in the transparency rankings?
How many of us three?
No, anybody. Just the raise your hand thing. It doesn't matter. It's a prelude to my skepticism. It's not that you can reliably record, assert, maintain your own identity. It's that there's still so much around the identity that can be compromised. Everything from your Uber rating, where you do a deal with the driver, to somebody has a gun at your head when you make that phone call and you're uniquely identified. I mean, it gets rid of identity-based fraud, but there's so much other stuff out there in the world that I think people overrate what Bitcoin can do versus what laws, anti-corruption, there's just so much out there that's not just mistaken identity, but coercion and misuse of power.
And so do you have a question, or is that just a general comment?
Yeah, I mean, I just want you to realize and to respond to that identity is not the only problem that creates fraud and misuse of funds and bribery and corruption and all this other stuff.
I think everyone would agree with that.
Sure. I would agree with that, but there's an incremental improvement here, or maybe even a revolutionary improvement, that makes it difficult for the normal sources of corruption to act on people's identity information, to act on people in the same way. It makes it more difficult. It's less of a centralized sort of touch point. And sure, those problems exist, and there's a place for jurisprudence and well-functioning governments and laws. But I don't think anyone's arguing against that. I think, but this is a technology that does afford us some new abilities in our society.
So we've got just a couple minutes left. I want to open the floor up to anyone else who might have a question. How about you over here?
Yes, I have a question to the panel. What's your thoughts in terms of the interoperability between the different ledgers? I mean, everybody has tried to develop its own ledger, and in the end of the day, you can have the tens of thousands of different blockchain ID solutions or systems. What's your view on that? Are we going to have something like DNS or, develop some sort of standard from bottom up?
I understood most of that, I think.
I didn't quite catch it, but if you...
Yeah, so you can't have a situation where, first of all, every single blockchain, you have to have an identity to interact with it. And so they have a dilemma. The dilemma is, if you're going to start a blockchain thing, you either force everybody to get a new identity to interact with your blockchain, or you accept one that they come with from somewhere else. It's a binary decision. And so if you force everyone coming to get a new identity to work with your blockchain, then every blockchain is another identity, and we're right back in the same problem we've had before. We have to get to the point where we have a way to establish trust across contexts. And that's what you were talking about, is that you use your claims, you get them in one place and use them in another. And until we get to that, then we won't have that problem. So we've led out on something called decentralized identifiers, DIDs. These are cryptographic identifiers. Without to get too technical, they just make it so that you can have an identity on Ethereum, Bitcoin, or Sovereign, or any other ledger that wants to standardize on these. And no matter which ledger the identity is on, you give it to someone and they can figure it out. And it's something that Uport has adopted. And it's something that several of the biggest have adopted. And it allows you to have an identity that will work across the ledgers.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for having such an excellent, lively panel.